James Garner was still loved by millions. His face never truly disappeared from American living rooms. Reruns of Maverick and the Rockford Files kept him familiar, comforting, and quietly timeless. He was one of those rare stars audiences felt they could trust. Calm, steady, dependable. The kind of man Hollywood believed would always be there. And then, slowly, he wasn't. There was no shocking headline announcing his exit, no scandal chasing him out of town, no public feud, no dramatic breakdown, and no emotional farewell tour. One of the most reliable stars in the industry simply began to step away from the spotlight, so quietly that most people never noticed it was happening at all. Which is exactly why his disappearance went unquestioned. In an industry obsessed with collapse, James Garner offered none. He didn't burn bridges in public. He didn't criticize studios in interviews. He didn't explain his choices. He allowed the world to assume something simple and harmless, that age had caught up with him, that he was slowing down, that he had earned the right to rest. But behind that calm public image, something very different was unfolding. Because James Garner was not retreating from fame, he was retreating from control. For more than 3 decades, he had lived inside a system that decided how hard he worked, how long he worked, and how much of his own body he could afford to sacrifice in the process. Schedules were relentless, physical demands were routine, recovery was treated like inconvenience, and the smiling, relaxed man audiences saw on screen had become incredibly skilled at hiding how much strain it took to keep performing that image. To the outside world, his career looked stable. To him, it felt managed. What looked like a natural slowdown was in truth a careful and deliberate pullback. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of awareness. An awareness that staying visible often meant surrendering more than he was willing to give. The most unsettling part of James Garner's disappearance is not how suddenly it happened. It is how easily it was explained away. Because his reputation protected the silence, his professionalism disguised the cost, and his refusal to complain made his absence feel reasonable instead of revealing. No one demanded answers. No one asked what had finally pushed one of Hollywood's most respected men to quietly remove himself from its center. But behind closed doors, James Garner was beginning to confront a truth he had avoided for years. That the same industry that celebrated him also depended on his compliance, and that walking away quietly and on his own terms might be the only way left to keep something he had never truly been allowed to own: his life. For most of his career, James Garner was known as the safest presence in Hollywood. The man with the easy smile, the relaxed voice, the actor who never seemed rattled no matter the pressure. Directors trusted him, co-stars felt comfortable around him, studios labeled him dependable, the kind of professional who showed up prepared, hit his marks, and never made a scene. In an industry built on egos and unpredictability, James Garner felt refreshingly stable. He was often described with the same phrase over and over again: the nicest man in Hollywood. And the image made sense. On screen, he played men who relied on intelligence more than aggression, men who deflected tension with humor, men who stayed calm while chaos unfolded around them. His charm felt natural, not manufactured. Nothing about him seemed forced. But what audiences saw as ease was actually discipline. James Garner had learned early how to keep emotions contained, how to soften discomfort into politeness, how to absorb pressure without letting it leak outward. The calm was not accidental, it was practiced. And it worked. Producers rarely worried about him, executives rarely questioned him. He was rewarded not just for talent, but for restraint, for never pushing too hard, for never demanding too loudly, for never reminding anyone that success often came at a cost. That's the version of James Garner everyone believed they knew. The agreeable star, the cooperative employee, the man who made difficult work look effortless. What almost no one noticed was how much of himself that image required him to hide. Behind the smile was a man who distrusted authority. Behind the relaxed posture was someone constantly managing pain and fatigue.
Behind the reputation for being easy was a professional who understood exactly how quickly opportunity could disappear if you stopped playing along. He didn't talk about it, he didn't complain, and he certainly didn't correct the narrative. Because the image protected him, it allowed him to move through Hollywood without confrontation. It kept expectations low and pressure subtle. It gave him room to survive in an environment that punished those who resisted openly. The truth is, James Garner didn't project calm because life felt calm. He projected it because he had learned that revealing discomfort only made things harder. And so for decades, the public saw a man who looked perfectly at ease inside fame. What they never saw was how carefully that version was constructed, how much effort it took to maintain, and how far it was from the private reality he carried quietly beneath the surface. A reality that would eventually make the image impossible to sustain.
Long before James Garner became the man everyone admired on screen, he was a boy learning lessons no one should have to learn so young. His childhood was far from the idyllic American story Hollywood would later sell audiences. His mother died when he was still a child, leaving a hole in his life that never fully closed. That absence shaped him in ways people would only later begin to understand. Not long after, his father remarried, and the new household brought chaos instead of comfort. Garner's stepmother was harsh, often cruel, and at times violently so. Injuries sent him to the hospital more than once, and yet there was no one he could safely confide in. Silence became a survival tool. He learned quickly that showing pain didn't invite help. It invited more scrutiny, more punishment, more exposure. Those early experiences left an indelible mark. They taught him that the world didn't always reward honesty about suffering, that resilience often meant concealing what you felt, that life was safer when you presented one face to the world while quietly enduring another. By the time he reached adolescence, Garner had mastered the art of the double life without even realizing it. He could smile, joke, and charm others, all while carrying the weight of fear, disappointment, and bruised pride beneath the surface. He had learned to make his pain invisible, to smooth over the rough edges, to project calm even when chaos roared inside him. This duality became a template for the man he would later become. The public would only ever see the confident, witty, charming actor. They would never see the boy who had learned to protect himself through silence. They wouldn't see the lessons of survival etched into his very posture, his expressions, his cautious trust. What his childhood gave him was both a shield and a skill. It allowed him to move through Hollywood with a rare steadiness, to appear unfazed by challenges that would break others, to maintain a reputation for being the nicest man in Hollywood. But it also demanded a cost. Every smile, every joke, every easygoing moment was underpinned by lessons learned long ago, that life is easier if you hide what truly hurts. And in that hidden world, James Garner had already begun to practice the pattern that would define his entire career, the art of living two lives at once, the life everyone sees and the life he quietly carries in silence away from prying eyes. It was the foundation of the man who could disappear for decades without anyone truly questioning why. He served in the Korean War, a place where danger was constant and survival depended on discipline, focus, and endurance. Garner's body came back marked in ways the public would never see. Shrapnel injuries, damaged knees, and scars both visible and invisible became a permanent part of him. Every movement, every step, carried reminders of the chaos he had endured. But the physical injuries were only half the story. War left emotional imprints just as deep, though far less visible. He had witnessed loss, fear, and moments that no one could fully prepare a young man to handle. And in the military, as in life, weakness or complaint could be fatal, or at the very least, dangerous to one's survival. Garner learned early that endurance, patience, and self-control weren't optional, they were essential. When he returned from Korea, he didn't step onto a Hollywood set dreaming of fame. He stepped into the world weary, cautious, and quietly hardened. The boy who had learned to hide his pain as a child now carried the disciplined restraint of a soldier. Every grin, every casual remark, every laid-back demeanor that fans loved was layered over the discipline and fortitude forged on foreign soil. Even in his earliest roles, that duality was visible, if you knew where to look.
His charm, his wit, his ability to disarm tension, all of it was underpinned by a self-control born from necessity. He could laugh on screen while enduring discomfort off it. He could charm co-stars while managing injuries that flared during long shoots. He could carry heavy physical roles with the stoicism of someone who had learned that complaining does nothing to change reality. The lessons of war didn't just shape his physical resilience, they shaped his approach to life and career. Garner learned that the world didn't owe him comfort, and sometimes the only way to survive was to move through it quietly, without complaint, without drawing attention to the cost. It was this combination, childhood silence, war-honed discipline, and the relentless self-control it demanded, that allowed him to navigate Hollywood on his own terms. The public saw the effortless charisma. They didn't see the quiet endurance. They didn't see the man who returned from war carrying invisible burdens, shaping the private life he would guard for decades. In many ways, James Garner's greatest performances off-screen were never filmed. They were lived, silent, controlled, and unbroken by the weight of a world that demanded more than most could give. And it was this hidden strength that made his later choices, his disappearances, his refusals to submit, both possible and inevitable. When James Garner stepped onto a set, cameras saw ease, audiences saw charm, wit, and effortless confidence. They saw a man who could handle any line, any scene, any stunt, and still flash that signature grin. But behind the bright lights, a different reality quietly unfolded, a reality few ever glimpsed.
Garner's body, already marked by childhood injuries and the scars of war, now carried the full weight of a Hollywood career. Maverick demanded stunts, long hours, and physical comedy that tested even the most athletic actors. And Garner didn't just act, he performed his own stunts. He jumped, ran, fell, and dodged in ways that would leave most professionals sidelined. Each leap and roll added strain to knees that had already been damaged, shoulders and back taking blows they weren't meant to endure. It wasn't just the physicality of stunts. Filming schedules were relentless. Back-to-back shoots, early call times, grueling days on location, and nights spent memorizing lines. Garner's body had no choice but to adapt, but it demanded a cost he quietly paid in solitude. Ice packs between takes, medication before cameras rolled, surgeries scheduled during rare breaks. These were the hidden measures that kept him performing at the level audiences expected. Pain became a constant companion. Not the kind of pain that invited attention or sympathy, but the quiet, unrelenting type that lives in muscles, joints, and bones, demanding respect without words. Garner learned to disguise it with posture, tone, and timing. The smiles remained, the wit remained, the charisma remained. But beneath the surface, the man who seemed unstoppable was often barely holding himself together. And the irony was sharp. While studios and audiences profited from his energy and stamina, Garner received far less in return than his contribution demanded. Requests for fair compensation or adequate rest were ignored. Complaints about the toll on his health could have been career-ending, yet he never complained publicly. He bore the burden silently, a private rebellion wrapped in professionalism. This was the duality of his life, fame on one side, suffering on the other. The world saw the star, the hero, the effortless performer. Very few saw the man balancing on the edge of his own endurance, negotiating every movement, every scene, every smile, against a body that had already given more than it could safely spare. It was a private cost, one that would follow him for decades. And it was only the beginning of the sacrifices that defined the hidden life James Garner carried, alongside the life everyone thought they knew. This was the body breaking down behind the image, the silent story of resilience no camera would ever capture. By the mid-1960s, James Garner had become one of television's brightest stars. Maverick had made him a household name, and audiences loved him for the wit, charm, and effortless cool he brought to the screen. Studios saw a reliable star, someone they could schedule, market, and profit from without complication. But behind the smiles, something was shifting. Garner's body was breaking down from stunts and long hours, yet contracts left him little room for recovery. He was expected to perform dangerous scenes again and again to make it look effortless, while the studio kept a tight grip on pay and creative control. And when he asked for reasonable accommodations, his concerns were ignored. The industry, which had praised him publicly, treated him privately as replaceable. This is when James Garner quietly drew a line in the sand. He didn't storm into press conferences or threaten studios with drama. He didn't publicly rail against the system.
He simply took action in a way that few had the courage or the protection to do at the time. He filed a lawsuit against the studio, challenging the contracts that treated actors like property, not people. At a moment when most stars feared speaking up, he demanded fairness. The move was risky, almost career suicide. Hollywood was known to punish those who resisted. Roles disappeared, opportunities dried up. Studios quietly reminded the world who was in charge, yet he never complained publicly. He bore the burden silently, a private rebellion wrapped in professionalism. 2 careers existed within one life. One was visible, celebrated, and adored by millions. The other was hidden, fought in courtrooms and boardrooms, quietly reshaping how he navigated the industry. The world only saw the first, but the second defined him in ways few could understand. Garner's first act of defiance was more than a legal battle. It was a statement about dignity, control, and self-respect. He proved that a man could succeed on his own terms without sacrificing everything to the system. Yet he did it quietly, almost invisibly, ensuring that audiences would continue to love the star without ever knowing the struggle behind him. It was a turning point, the first public acknowledgement that James Garner would no longer allow Hollywood to dictate the limits of his body, his career, or his life. And it was only the beginning of a lifetime spent balancing the world's expectations with his own unwavering standards. This was James Garner's first quiet rebellion, and it set the stage for the secret life he would carry for decades.
When the Rockford Files premiered in 1974, the world saw James Garner's triumphant return. The witty, clever, slightly world-weary private investigator captured audiences immediately. Fans cheered, critics praised, and Hollywood seemed to welcome back the man they had once admired on Maverick. On screen, Garner was effortless, relaxed, charming, and completely in control. But off-screen, the story was far more complicated. The man walking onto the set each day was not the same man who had walked away years earlier. His body carried decades of strain from war injuries, childhood trauma, and the relentless demands of early stardom. Knees that had taken countless falls on Maverick a decade earlier protested every jump. Shoulders ached from stunts. Back injuries flared unpredictably. And yet, the cameras never saw the cost. Every day, Garner managed a private routine to keep him performing. Ice packs, painkillers, and medications became part of the rhythm of the shoot. He timed surgeries around the production schedule, enduring recovery in private so no one would question his commitment. Long hours were punctuated with careful stretches, quiet moments of rest, and silent endurance that no one ever witnessed. Even the signature slouched posture of Jim Rockford carried meaning. It was not merely acting. It was a man negotiating pain, fatigue, and the limitations of a body that had endured far more than the public ever knew. The delayed responses, the subtle pauses, the weary humor, they were all part of a performance shaped not only by talent, but by survival. Behind the scenes, Garner's comeback was as much a test of resilience as it was a professional victory. While viewers marveled at his wit and charm, he was navigating an invisible battlefield, balancing stunts and lines with injuries that demanded constant attention. Every scene was a careful calculation, every movement measured against decades of accumulated wear. And yet, Garner never complained, never dramatized, never let audiences or colleagues see the private cost. His professionalism hid the struggle, maintaining the illusion that success had returned easily. The Rockford Files was a triumph on screen, but off-screen it was endurance. A comeback layered with hidden pain, meticulous preparation, and quiet discipline. It revealed that the real James Garner had mastered the art of living 2 lives. The hero everyone adored, and the man quietly surviving, managing, and enduring a body that had never forgotten its scars. This was the reality behind the laughter, the clever remarks, and the confident stride. A man performing brilliance while carrying a weight that no camera, no award, and no audience could ever capture. By the late 1970s, James Garner had proven he could return to Hollywood on his own terms. The Rockford Files had cemented his place as a television legend, and audiences adored him more than ever. On the surface, it looked like a story of triumph. The star who had vanished was back, stronger, wiser, and still effortlessly charming. But beneath that success, the struggle was far from over. Garner had never forgotten the lessons of his first legal battle years earlier. He knew the system could be harsh. He knew that defiance carried consequences. And yet, as syndication revenue began to flow in, he noticed something disturbing. The accounting didn't add up. Studios were profiting from his work far beyond what he was being paid. The contracts he had once challenged were still being used to limit him. Once again, Garner took action, but this time the stakes were even higher.
Lawsuits in Hollywood rarely end quietly. Stars who challenge studios often face invisible punishments, roles delayed, projects quietly cancelled, reputations subtly tarnished. And James Garner knew all of this. Still, he refused to stay silent. The second legal battle was not about ego. It was about fairness, about reclaiming control, and about setting a precedent for himself. It was about proving that a man could succeed in Hollywood without surrendering to its demands. For decades, Garner had lived in a strange middle space, publicly celebrated, adored by fans, and respected by colleagues. Privately, he was navigating the quiet punishment reserved for those who challenged the system. He was still working, still delivering brilliant performances, still appearing untouchable, but he had learned the cost of speaking up. Hollywood rarely forgives those who resist quietly, methodically, and professionally. There is no applause for subtle defiance, no reward for measured courage. The message is clear: compliance is safer, rebellion is expensive. And yet, Garner endured. He maintained his charm, his wit, and his reputation, while simultaneously asserting his rights. Every negotiation, every lawsuit, every quiet act of resistance was done behind the scenes, shielded from the public eye. To the world, he was still the effortless hero. To himself, he was a man reclaiming control of his life and his career, even if it meant navigating years of invisible friction and deliberate obstruction. This chapter of James Garner's life shows a critical truth. True strength is not just performing under pressure. True strength is standing up for yourself when everyone expects you to comply, and doing so without letting the world see how much it costs you. For decades, he succeeded at both, living two parallel lives, the beloved public star and the private man fighting battles Hollywood never publicly acknowledged. For more than 3 decades, James Garner lived a life that few could ever fully understand. To the public, he was the effortless charmer, the witty, dependable star of Maverick and the Rockford Files. Fans saw a man who always had a clever line, a reassuring smile, and a calm presence. But behind the cameras, James Garner carried a life almost invisible, a life defined by pain, endurance, and quiet resistance. This was not the kind of double life tabloids write about. There were no secret affairs, no scandals hidden behind closed doors, no sensational betrayals or gossip-worthy escapades. Garner's double life was far subtler, far more personal, and far more demanding. It was the life of a man managing his body, his career, and his dignity simultaneously, all while maintaining the public image that allowed him to survive in Hollywood. For 30 years, he juggled fame and private struggle with precision. His body carried the weight of childhood injuries, war wounds, and decades of punishing stunts. His health required constant attention, ice packs between scenes, surgery scheduled around shoots, medication to endure long hours, and careful pacing to avoid breaking down entirely. Every performance, every joke, every casual movement on set was layered over a foundation of pain he never allowed audiences to see. Alongside the physical burden came a constant negotiation for control. Garner had learned early that Hollywood demanded compliance. To protect himself, he had to enforce boundaries, defend contracts, and sometimes refuse work opportunities quietly. Speaking too loudly could end a career. Silence was often safer, but even silence came at a cost. He had to carry disappointment, frustration, and the knowledge that he could be replaced at any moment, all while appearing serene and cooperative. His double life was also emotional. He had learned to contain fear, stress, and fatigue, never allowing them to spill into his public persona. Relationships, work, and family all demanded parts of him that he sometimes could not fully give. And yet, he managed to navigate these pressures without compromising the integrity of the life he showed the world. This private world, hidden from cameras and headlines, defined James Garner as much as his performances did. It required endurance, discipline, and careful calculation, and it explained the choices he made, why he disappeared when he needed to, why he fought in court quietly but decisively, and why he never publicly dramatized his struggles. For 30 years, the real James Garner lived 2 lives, one adored by millions, the other fiercely protected, quietly endured, and entirely his own. That is the double life no one knew, until now.